Hello everyone, Lisa Simser here. This is your rigorous reading, close reading professional development for November. Our rigorous reading schedule, we have talked about focused instruction, independent reading, and scaffolded reading up through the month of October. And now moving into the rest of the year, we're focusing on close reading, a bunch of different questioning strategies and techniques, and then moving into action-oriented tasks and assessments to wrap up the year. So again, why are we doing this? We are doing this because it is mandated, first of all, by our legislature that we address literacy with evidence-based instruction, and that we make sure that teachers have sufficient training in literacy methods. And with the change to the ELA Common Core standards, there were some shifts that occurred that didn't necessarily match perfectly with the ways that Anoka Hennepin has approached literacy in the past. Not that we're doing it wrong, it just means that there's been a change. And so part of this training is about getting us up to date with the expectations of the Common Core standards, as well as setting a really strong foundation for the literacy adoption, so that when we see some changes there, we understand, where that's coming from. So at the end of each session, we are given a homework, per se, kind of task. And so you were asked to do some reading in the rigorous reading book and then conduct at least one scaffolded small group lesson. The idea was that students would be doing the reading and that we'd be coaching from the side, trying desperately to have the students doing more of the work than the teacher. And so just wanted to remind you of that task and give you a chance, a reason to contact a colleague and talk about, okay, how did it go? So make sure that you take some time in the next couple weeks to share out how did it go with trying the scaffolded reading approach. For today, our objectives: develop a clear understanding of what is meant by close reading, examine the key features of close reading and how that impacts students, and then understand the importance of collaborative conversations as a way of deepening students' understanding, particularly with complex texts. So we have done quite a bit of study of close reading. That was most of what we did with last year's professional development. You'll recognize the book there, the Nancy Boyles book. She came and trained us, I think, several times, twice at least, last year. And one thing that I still am aware of is that, not necessarily around Monroe, but around the school district and certainly elsewhere, when people talk about close reading, I don't know that they really know what it is. There are so many similar terms, and I find it really funny that you can hear people talk about close reading, or closed reading. Anyway, this is meant to be a joke, just a reminder that it really is about close reading, and not that you're just getting close to the text, but that you're going deep with a complex text. So what exactly is close reading? I'm confident that all of you already know, but if you would take a moment, if you're alone, just stop the presentation and jot down, write it down. What do you think it really is? What are some of the key points that you understand? If you're sitting and viewing this with a colleague, maybe just take a minute, pause the presentation, and just share. What do you really think it is? All right, we have an introduction to close reading available for you to watch. I will send the links for this and it will be available to you in the PowerPoint, assuming that just clicking here doesn't work, which I don't think it will. But you'll have these short videos to view. So we've been looking at the gradual release of responsibility model throughout our training and actually throughout my career at Anoka Hennepin. And what's interesting about close reading is it doesn't fit in one specific strategy. It is a way of reading, a series of steps, an approach to reading complex texts that goes through all of the levels here. We would need to model it, we would need to guide students through it, We'd want them collaboratively trying to do close reading, as well as eventually doing close reading independently. What I find interesting is that close reading is not really a new topic. It's been around for a long time. I'm fairly old, and I was doing close readings back in college and high school, and it was about exactly what we're telling our students to do today. So really the new heightened experience with close reading is just the fact that it was language introduced in the Common Core standards that we hadn't really used overtly in K-12 education. So not all that new, but a new focus. So what is it? Here you can check your answers if you jotted down some ideas of what close reading is. It requires that you have short, complex passages. It requires repeated readings. The idea that you can't get everything you need to from the text without going back and checking again, without going deeper. It usually involves annotation of some kind, whether students are able to actually write on the text or whether they're using post-it notes or taking notes elsewhere. Most research suggests that annotation directly on the text is one of the most powerful ways. So, don't feel guilty about making those copies. When we get the text in students' hands and help them to pull it all apart with all their drawings and arrows and underlining, they're more apt to see the depth with which they're analyzing. Well, and we're able to too. Collaborative conversations are another part of close reading, and I'm not certain that our training from Nancy Boyles focused on this element as much as the rigorous reading text does. The idea that students really need to work together, that we gain much more from going deeply with a text when we're able to hear the ideas of those around us. So establishing structures in your classroom where you can discuss well, where partners can think together about a certain text, and then rotate to new partners to get new ideas, that's one of the key traits of the close reading process. And then lastly, you absolutely need to ask students text-dependent questions, and better yet, have them generate text-dependent questions. So not simply your reader response kinds of things. What did you think of this text, or do you relate to this character? But actually asking them to go deeply into the text and say, well, what evidence do you have that this character is like you or not like you? So moving away from our reader response focus that a lot of us have in our curriculum from the beginning of the school year, and pushing for evidence-based text-dependent questions, things that have to be identified from the text. Be aware that I had a misconception, maybe you did as well, that text-dependent meant literal questions. And in fact, it can mean figurative and inferential questions as well. But you're asking students to provide the evidence from the text as to where they made that inference or where they determined that figurative understanding. So a little misconception I had. Hopefully you join me in that, and now it's fixed. All right, so to go deeper with these different salient features, the short complex text needs to be really only a few paragraphs, maybe a small poem. It should not be a lengthy passage because you really want to go deep with small pieces. It needs to be sufficiently complex for multiple readings, so there needs to be more to uncover. If students get the idea that a close reading means that they can just get the plot elements through one reading, it will lose the power. It will just become redundant. Repeated readings require that there's more to be understood as we keep reading. So recognize that it's not a text that's outside of a student's accessibility. It's not, above grade level necessarily, although it could be. The point is that it has sufficient depth for them to uncover more upon repeated readings. And so those repeated readings, it is meant, first of all, to train students that repeated reading is sometimes necessary simply to understand a text, that repeated reading should not be something we shy away from. But it's also meant to be the thing that suggests, with a little more guidance, with some support, with maybe looking at a text from a different lens, you can learn more. So helping students to say, okay, now read this from the point of view of the dog. Now read this as if you're the mother. Now read this as if you're the principal. Changing the perspective or the purpose while reading the text really makes a significant difference. I will have heard of people suggesting that, that teachers should ask students, what if you were the editor? What if this person submitted this text to the publishing company? What would you tell them? And it's really fun to see which pieces of evidence they understand deeply about how text is constructed when you ask them to behave like an editor or a fellow author. So that last point, to find evidence and inferences and conclusions, that's again the point of repeated readings, that upon further exploration we find more. One of the things that the text says is that students benefit from repeated reading when they're allowed to engage in collaborative conversations, that those conversations and repeated readings allow them to dig more deeply, and it will, by bonus, improve their fluency and their comprehension. So great strategy for teaching kids that, get together with a partner, get together with your friend and reread this, try it again, and see if you can't understand more about what's happening. So the process of annotation is also a salient feature of close reading. Students must slow down their reading in order to write on the text. And as I said before, research suggests that writing directly on the text whenever possible, it's not always possible, but whenever it is very helpful. We want students to be able to clarify central ideas. We want them to circle confusing words. We want to teach them how to take notes, how to react in the margins of the text, asking questions, highlighting examples, that kind of thing. And then use those annotations for further discussion. That's the notes then that they take, the jots that they put on the text become the seeds of those collaborative conversations. And so collaborative conversations, it really is interaction with both peers and teachers. So it can be a whole group guided activity, or it can be in small groups where students are working without a lot of support from the teacher. The idea is we want to increase students' use of academic language. So giving them specific elements to look for, whether they're looking for metaphors or they're looking for sensory details or they're looking for dialogue, giving them academic language to go with the text is helpful. And then facilitating one another's understanding. So teaching students how to say, well, did you understand what was happening? Or can we do a summary before we talk more about this text? Asking them, encouraging students to say to each other, well, where did you find that? What's your support? Or show me in the text how you know that. Having them practice those kinds of academic conversations in their collaborative conversations is a really great thing to do. So lastly, text-dependent questions, and I have 2 slides for you about this. It's the idea that you help students with questions that really force them to go deeper with the text. So questions that focus on structure or meaning or logical inferences, and requires them to say, I found it in paragraph 2, or it's on page 13, whatever, that they need to show where that comes from. They help to develop the habit of thinking critically. I think that comes again from the idea of citing evidence, but it is often an example of dialogic teaching, that interactive discussion-based teaching, and it's not an independent activity. So the thinking there is that along with having students working together, they are engaging with each other. So the dialogic teaching is really about students teaching each other, questioning each other, and we model that for them in whole group, but then they go off and use those questions as a way to have further conversation. which is what the next point is, providing an opportunity for students to follow their own lines of thinking. This is one of the things I appreciate about close reading, is that it does encourage students to come up with their own theories or thought about texts. And as long as they can support it, you know, there isn't an opportunity to say, no, I think you're wrong. Although that can happen too. But it's really about helping students support their line of thinking, their opinions about what they're seeing in the text with evidence. So there are 4 levels of questions. We'll get you that link so that you can watch that short presentation as well. The book that you're seeing behind, Introduction to Text-Dependent Questions, Pathways to Close and Critical Reading, is a text that I've been told we can ask for from the district. They're trying to get a copy out to each building. So when that arrives, if it comes to me, I will let you know. The next video is to highlight the role of the teacher in the close reading process. So again, I will get the links for this to you. As with each presentation, it ends with some sort of homework or bring it back kind of task. And the task for this one is simply to think carefully about where you might find a close reading text, where you might be able to adjust what you're currently doing and choose a close reading activity rather than something that is not close reading. So how can you find a text within the block of resources we already have that you know students will be able to go much more deeply with than you maybe have gone in the past? So share that out with your colleagues. Highlight why you think it's a strong text for a close reading process. Thanks a lot for listening. I know it's not thrilling to hear me just talk at you over your computer, but I hope you appreciate the efficiency of this. Saved you an extra meeting. And please speak with your colleagues, speak with me, let me know how I can help in having you take on more close reading activities in your classrooms to benefit your students. Thanks a lot.